Hello, how are you? This piece is for human adults or those wanting to be adults. It's not aimed at any particular age group. There's no height requirement. Just a readiness to take an active responsibility for your life and those others that yours touches and affects. If you're tired of distractions, half-truths, outright lies and excuses, if you're looking to take a positive step that can get you closer to the world you want to live in, then this might be helpful to you. And if it's not, you can always turn it off. I'm calling this piece Embracing the Real. So there's a question. I've been sitting with this for a while now, and I want to invite you into it. What if the very thing that allowed us to build civilizations, to cooperate across tribes, to dream up laws and gods and nations, is now the thing most likely to undo us? I'm talking about belief. Not belief in the narrow sense of religion or ideology, but belief in its fullest, most human sense. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what's true, who deserves what, and why we're here. I spent a lot of time trying to understand whether belief is something we could ever set aside, whether human history might have been more peaceful, more civilized, if we'd simply stuck to facts. But the more I've explored it with historians and neuroscientists and philosophers, and just by watching how my own mind works, the more I've realized something. We can't set belief aside, but we might be able to learn how to hold it and manifest it differently. This is a conversation about what belief is, where it came from, what its value's been, and why it's increasingly so dangerous. And most importantly, whether we can learn to use it without being used by it. Let's start with a simple question. Why do humans believe anything at all? You might assume belief emerged when we became conscious enough to ask questions with no immediate survival value, like, why are we here? Or what happens after we die? But the science tells a slightly different story. The brain, as neuroscientists now understand it, is fundamentally a prediction engine. Every second of every day, it's generating hypotheses about what's going to happen next. Most animals do this. What changed in humans was something called metacognition, the ability to think about our own thinking. Around 70,000 years ago, something shifted. The archaeologist Stephen Mythen calls it cognitive fluidity. The moment our minds started integrating different domains of knowledge, tool-making, social relationships, the natural world, and speculation about the invisible. That integration gave birth to belief as we know it. Consciously held stories about reality that could be shared, debated, and passed down. What made this leap possible was theory of mind, our species' extraordinary ability to imagine what another person is thinking. Once I know that you share my belief in a god or a nation, we can cooperate not because we've met, but because we share a story. And here's why that mattered. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar famously observed that primates without symbolic belief systems can't maintain stable groups larger than about 100-150 individuals. But humans? We started forming tribes, then cities, then nations, groups of millions bound together not by blood, but by shared stories. A piece of paper has value. A flag is worth dying for. An unseen force rewards moral behavior. These are not facts, they're beliefs, and they allowed us to do something no other species has ever done: cooperate at scale. So belief was never a glitch, it was an upgrade. But here's where things get complicated. When we use the word belief, we're actually describing a whole spectrum of cognitive states, and they're not the same. At one end, you have a provisional idea. That's what I'm holding right now as I speak to you. I might say I'm intrigued by the possibility that learning to hold beliefs lightly could reduce conflict. Now, that's not a belief, not yet. It's a hypothesis. It's open. Further along the spectrum, you have working assumptions. The sun will rise tomorrow. This chair will hold me. These are beliefs too, but they're so practical we hardly notice them. Then you get to confirmed hypotheses. These are ideas that have been tested against evidence. Evolution by natural selection. The germ theory of disease. They're not absolute. Science doesn't do absolute. But they're reliable enough to act on. And then we cross a line. When a belief becomes fused with identity, it changes. It moves from the prefrontal cortex, the reasoning part of the brain, into circuits that involve the amygdala, the threat detection system. Now, when that belief is challenged, your brain reacts as if your life is threatened. And when contradictory evidence appears, your brain's reward centers light up when you dismiss it. This isn't irrationality. This is neurobiology. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls this cognitive laziness, the brain's natural tendency to turn fluid ideas into fixed certainties because it's more efficient. And this is where belief stops serving us and starts controlling us. So what happens when ideas, concepts and hypotheses harden and become beliefs? History gives us the answer. So let's be clear about something. Beliefs rarely start wars, but they almost always enable them. Think about it this way. Without belief, a conflict sounds like this. We want their land because we need resources. That's honest, but it's also hard to recruit people to die for. Add belief, and it becomes God gave us this land. They're infidels, occupying what is rightfully ours. To fight is sacred. To die is glorious. Now you have something that can sustain violence for generations. I looked at the data, and you might find this surprising. According to the Encyclopedia of Wars, only about 7% of historical conflicts were primarily motivated by religion. Even if you stretch the definition, you're looking at maybe 15%. But that's not the whole story. In the remaining 85% of conflicts, belief played a supporting role. It was the recruitment tool, the moral license, the dehumanization machine. They are vermin. They are traitors. They're enemies of the people. They are servants of Satan. The 20th century proved that secular ideologies can be every bit as belief-laden as religions. Stalin's purges, Mao's revolutions, Pol Pot's killing fields. These weren't religious conflicts. They were driven by beliefs about class enemies, historical inevitability, and the purifying power of revolutionary violence. The philosopher Karl Popper said something that haunts me. He wrote, "The attempt to make heaven on earth invariably produces hell." Because when you believe with absolute certainty that you're building paradise, anyone who stands in your way becomes not just an opponent, but an obstacle to utopia. And utopia justifies anything. So, where does that leave us today? We're living in a moment that our biology did not prepare us for. For most of human history, beliefs were shaped by local information, slow transmission, and face-to-face accountability. Today, we swim in a torrent of competing claims, algorithmically amplified to exploit our cognitive vulnerabilities. The researcher René de Resta puts it this way: we are witnessing the algorithmic amplification of belief rigidity. Social media platforms profit from outrage, and nothing generates outrage like identity-anchored beliefs under threat. So the very architecture of our information environment pushes us from provisional ideas toward dogmatic certainty. And here's the cruel irony. The problems we now face, climate change, pandemic responses, AI governance, nuclear proliferation, mass migration, all require the exact opposite. They require belief flexibility, the ability to update our models, to compromise with adversaries, to prioritize long-term survival over short-term tribal advantage. Instead, we see climate change denial that has almost nothing to do with scientific facts and almost everything to do with identity. We saw pandemic response fracture along ideological lines. We see AI safety debates already calcifying into tribal warfare. At the same time, traditional belief systems are eroding. Fewer people identify with organized religion. National and tribal identities are weakening. And into that meaning vacuum rush hyper-compensatory beliefs, conspiracy theories, cults of personality, radical nationalistic ideologies, offering the one thing that humans crave when they're uncertain: certainty. So here's the paradox we're living in. Older established beliefs are softening, becoming weaker. Fewer people rigidly hold traditional identities, but they're also becoming more extreme. Those who do hold them ever more fervently and tightly. And we haven't even begun to reckon with what that means. Now, I want to pause for a moment and get honest about something I've been circling around. When I talk about holding beliefs lightly, some of you might be thinking, that sounds nice, but what about beliefs that are designed specifically to resist being held lightly? Because not all beliefs are created equal. Some belief systems, and I'm going to name them plainly, come with built-in mechanisms to discourage doubt, punish questioning, and sanctify certainty. Religions with doctrines of infallibility, traditions that equate questioning with betrayal, patriotism that treats critique as treason, ideologies that brand doubters as heretics or counter-revolutionaries. These are not belief systems that invite you to hold them lightly. They are belief systems that demand you be held by them. And here's what I want to suggest. We need to talk about these beliefs differently. Let's have a look at how this works. Many traditional religions have, over centuries, developed sophisticated structures to protect core beliefs from scrutiny. Divine revelation, by definition, cannot be subject to human evidence. Sacred texts are framed as inerrant. Dogma is enforced through social ostracism, excommunication, or the threat of eternal consequences. When a belief system tells you that doubt itself is a moral failing, or worse, an eternal crime, you are no longer in the realm of belief as hypothesis. You are in the realm of belief as a trap. Patriotism often operates in a similar fashion. To question the nation's founding myths its military actions, its exceptionalism, is framed not as intellectual honesty, but as disloyalty. America, love it or leave it. My country, right or wrong. These are not invitations to reflection. They are commands to comply. Tradition, too, can become a cage. We've always done it this way. It's not an argument. It's a veto. When the weight of ancestry is used to shut down inquiry, tradition ceases to be wisdom, and it becomes inherited tyranny. And here's the uncomfortable truth. These structures exist for a reason. They work. They create cohesion, loyalty, and stability. They have held civilizations together for millennia. But they also create a population trained to stop thinking at the boundary of the sacred. And in the 21st century, that is a luxury we can no longer afford. Let me give you an example of a belief so widely held, so deeply embedded, that most people don't even recognize it as a belief. I'm talking about the human consumption of animal meat, specifically the conviction that our current levels of meat production and consumption are normal, necessary, or beyond serious question. Now, I want to be careful. I'm not saying that eating meat is a belief. It's a behavior. But the justification for continuing that behavior in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, that is a belief system. And here's what that belief system looks like. After many decades of evidence gathering, data analysis, and peer-reviewed scientific study into animal farming and human meat consumption, the consensus across multiple fields is remarkably clear. For our own health, cardiovascular disease, colorectal cancer, antibiotic resistance, for the health of planetary ecosystems, deforestation, water use, biodiversity collapse, for the stability of the global climate, methane emissions, carbon footprint, soil degradation. In almost every metric, the science tells us that we need to drastically reduce our farming and consumption of animals. That's not a fringe position. It's the World Health Organization, the IPCC, the Lancet, major medical and environmental bodies worldwide. So why hasn't anything changed? Because we have built a fortress of beliefs around the dinner plate. Meat is central to our traditions. The Thanksgiving turkey, the summer barbecue, the Christmas ham. It's woven into cultural events, wedding feasts, religious sacrifices, national cuisines. It's tied to identity, masculinity, strength, prosperity. And on top of that, we simply like it. None of these are bad reasons to do something. But here's the belief part. We have collectively decided that these reasons are sufficient to dismiss or ignore the scientific evidence. We have decided that tradition and pleasure outweigh planetary health. We have decided, without really deciding, that the question is closed. And the belief reinforces itself. Our governments continue to subsidize animal agriculture to the tune of billions of dollars annually. Public schools offer meatless Mondays as a token gesture, while serving factory-farmed meat the rest of the week. The idea of genuinely rethinking our relationship with animals is dismissed as radical or unrealistic, not because it's been fairly evaluated, but because it challenges something we don't want to examine. This is what a hidden belief looks like. It doesn't wear robes or carry a flag. It sits on your plate, and it defends itself not with arguments, but with inertia, comfort, and the weight of 1,000 unexamined traditions. I'm not saying everyone must become a vegan tomorrow. I'm saying notice how rarely we even ask the question. Notice how quickly we change the subject when the evidence comes up. Notice how we treat the very act of questioning as impolite or extreme. That is belief doing what belief does best, protecting itself from scrutiny by making the scrutiny itself seem unreasonable. And that, whether it's about gods, nations, or bacon, is exactly what we need to learn to see. This is just one example, but it reveals a pattern. When comfort, tradition, and identity align against evidence, evidence almost always loses, unless we learn to see the belief hiding in plain sight. Because something else has happened in our culture that I think we've become dangerously numb to. We have normalized giving belief, faith, conviction, intuition the same weight as repeatable observation, hard evidence, and independent verification. Think about how often we hear, "Well, that's your truth, this is mine." It sounds tolerant, right? But what it actually does is level the playing field between a claim supported by decades of peer-reviewed research and a claim pulled from a sacred text or a YouTube algorithm. This is not harmless. When we treat all beliefs as equally valid regardless of their evidentiary basis, we lose the ability to make collective decisions based on reality. We get climate policy stalled by people who believe the science is a hoax. We get public health responses crippled by people who believe vaccines contain tracking devices. We get children taught that ancient cosmological myths are equivalent to the theory of evolution. I want to be very clear about what I'm saying here. I'm not saying that religious beliefs or traditions have no value. They have given billions of people meaning, community, and moral structure. I am saying that we have made a catastrophic error in normalizing the idea that beliefs derived from faith and beliefs derived from evidence are empirically equal. They are not. One can be tested. The other, by definition, cannot. And when we collapse that distinction, we create a world where any claim, no matter how outlandish, no matter how harmful, can claim the dignity of belief and demand equal standing with established, observable, testable fact. Now, let me address something that appears to challenge an idea I've already endorsed. If belief is so deeply integral to the human species, how is it that there are millions of atheists functioning perfectly well in the world? People who have no religion, no supernatural commitments, no sacred texts, yet still have meaning, still have community, still have moral compasses. This is important. The atheist is not a person without belief. The atheist is a person who has moved on from one particular class of belief, the class that demands immunity from questioning. Atheists hold beliefs. Of course they do. They believe in human dignity or in scientific progress or in the value of art and connection and love. But these beliefs tend to be held provisionally, open to revision, accountable to evidence and experience. The atheist proves that it is possible to shed the unholdable beliefs, the ones that punish doubt, without descending into nihilism or chaos. And I'll add that atheists aren't the only ones who figured this out. There are religious believers, plenty of them, who hold their faith without demanding immunity from questioning. A Reformed Jew who wrestles with the text. A Catholic who believes in evolution and loves the mystery. A Sufi who sees certainty as the enemy of devotion. These traditions exist, and they prove that the problem isn't belief itself. It's the refusal to let belief be questioned. And this raises a profound question for the rest of us. If it is possible to live meaningfully without doctrines that forbid questioning, then why do we continue to grant these doctrines special protection? Why do we continue to treat faith as a virtue, rather than what it often is, the suspension of the very critical faculties that have kept our species alive? So, I want to ask the question directly. Are the belief systems that demand unquestioning allegiance, the dogmatic religions, the absolutist ideologies, the sacred patriotisms, are they still serving the needs of humanity and life on Earth? I think the honest answer is sometimes yes, but increasingly no. They served us when we needed internal cohesion to survive external threats. They served us when information was scarce and the luxury of doubt could mean expulsion from the only community you could rely on. But today our threats are global and our communities are planetary. The cohesion that served the tribe now divides the species. The certainty that comforted the individual now blinds us to complexity. The authority that stabilized the society now resists the very adaptation we need to survive. Climate change doesn't care about sacred texts. Nuclear weapons don't respect patriotic fervour. A pandemic will exploit any gap between belief and reality. Important questions about human and animal biology, sexuality, gender fluidity were barely acknowledged just a century ago in Western culture. Today, they loom large in conversations around the planet. We are living with tools designed for a world that no longer exists. So, what would it mean to move on? Not to abandon belief entirely. I've already argued that that's neither possible nor desirable. But to move on from unquestionable belief. To retire the category of thought that is immune to evidence, protected from criticism, and armoured against accountability. What would that look like? First, it would mean demoting faith from a virtue to what it actually is. It's a psychological state that can be deployed for good or ill, but that carries no epistemic weight. We would stop treating "I believe it" as a justification for anything. We would ask instead, what's your evidence? How could you be wrong? What could change your mind? Second, it would mean redrawing the lines between private conviction and public policy. You may believe, as a matter of faith, that the earth is 6,000 years old. That belief is entitled to your protection, your community, your practices. It's not entitled to determine what is taught in public schools. We need the courage to say this clearly and without apology. Third, it would mean holding our own traditions accountable. Patriotism that cannot be criticized is not patriotism, it's idolatry. Tradition that cannot be questioned is not wisdom, it's habit, grown tyrannical. We need to develop the maturity to love our cultures while refusing to be owned by them. Fourth, it would mean taking full responsibility for our decisions. When we attribute our choices to divine command, sacred text, or ancestral mandate, we are outsourcing accountability. To move on is to say, this is my decision. I own it. I will answer for it. This is terrifying. I know. Because if we are fully accountable for our choices, we cannot hide behind revelation. We cannot claim we were just following orders from God or country or tradition. We are naked in our responsibility. But that nakedness is also our dignity. It's what makes us adults rather than children. It's what makes democracy possible rather than perpetual guardianship by priests and kings. So how might this be achieved? Not by conquest. You do not argue someone out of a belief system that has defined their identity and their community and their hope. That approach has been tried for centuries, and it usually ends in more conflict. Instead, I think we achieve it by normalizing the alternative, by building communities, secular, interfaith, post-dogmatic, where questioning is safe, where doubt is welcome, where people can transition without losing everything, by educating for epistemic humility from the earliest ages, teaching children not what to think, but how to recognize the difference between evidence and assertion, between hypothesis and dogma, between healthy conviction and dangerous certainty. By celebrating the questioners, the reformers, the people who love their traditions enough to challenge them and demand that they be honest, and who had the courage to walk away when they could not be. And by telling a new story, one where maturity is not certainty, but the capacity to live with uncertainty, where wisdom is not having all the answers, but asking better questions, where faith, if it survives at all, is not belief in spite of evidence, but trust in the process of seeking. I'm not naive about the difficulty here. There are powerful institutions that profit from certainty, political machines that run on outrage, media empires that monetize division, religious authorities whose power depends on unquestioning loyalty. They will not welcome a world where beliefs are held lightly. So this isn't just an educational project, it's a political one. I want to be clear. I'm not proposing that we forcibly strip anyone of their beliefs. That would be a betrayal of the very principle I'm defending, that beliefs should be held voluntarily, consciously, and accountably. But I am proposing that we stop pretending all beliefs deserve equal respect, that we stop protecting the unprotectable, that we start teaching the difference between a claim that submits to evidence and a claim that demands immunity from it. And that we ask ourselves honestly whether the beliefs we hold most sacred are serving the flourishing of humanity and life on the planet, or whether they've become obstacles that we, in our maturity, are now required to outgrow. Because the world does not need our certainty. It needs our honesty. Right then, what do we do? I've asked and been asked this question a lot. If belief is hardwired, if it's served us for millennia, if its dangers are real, what then? The first thing I want to say is this. The fantasy of a belief-free humanity, which, frankly, I had harboured myself for quite some time, is itself a belief, and it's not a helpful one. We can't eliminate belief, but we might be able to learn to hold it differently. The writer Yuval Noah Harari, in his book Sapiens, argues that what made Homo sapiens dominant was our ability to believe in shared fictions. But he also warns that that same capacity can become a trap. His phrase for what we need is simple and profound. Holding beliefs lightly. Not abandoning them, holding them lightly. Inhabiting them consciously, recognizing them as mental constructs rather than absolute truths, and being willing to update them when evidence demands. Now, before continuing, I want to acknowledge that for many people, beliefs aren't intellectual choices at all. They're embedded in family structures, economic survival, and social belonging. Asking someone to hold their beliefs lightly while they depend on a community that demands certainty is not just asking for intellectual flexibility, it's asking for courage many just can't afford. This piece is about what's possible, not what's easy. So, how do we teach that? Well, I think it starts with giving people a better vocabulary. Right now, we use the word belief to describe everything from a passing thought to a sacred conviction. But those are not the same thing. If we could name the difference, this is an idea, this is a working assumption, this is a hypothesis, this is identity-anchored belief, we'd have more distance from our own certainties. In schools, we could teach belief mapping, asking students to track how their views change over time, help them to see that beliefs are dynamic, not fixed. We could teach perspective taking as a skill, not just a value. The research is clear. When you systematically argue from an opposing position, you build neural pathways for empathy and cognitive flexibility. For adults, we need to normalize doubt, not as weakness, but as rigor. Imagine if organizations rewarded people for updating their views instead of punishing them for inconsistency. Imagine if public figures were celebrated for changing their minds instead of being mocked for it. And at the societal level, we need to reckon with the platforms that profit from our worst cognitive habits. Algorithmic transparency, pre-bunking campaigns that expose manipulation tactics before they're used, designing digital spaces that reward curiosity instead of outrage. But I'd be dishonest if I stopped there, because there's a harder truth underneath all of this. The changes that I'm describing, learning to hold beliefs lightly, building cultures of questioning, holding ourselves accountable to evidence, these are not easy. They may not even be likely, and the forces arrayed against them are not minor. What happens if we fail? What happens if we continue as we are, rewarding certainty, punishing doubt, treating belief and evidence as equal, letting our identities fuse with our convictions until any challenge feels like an attack? I think we already see the answer taking shape. We see democracies unable to agree on basic facts, paralyzed by mutually exclusive realities. We see a planetary ecosystem destabilizing, while half the population dismisses the science because it conflicts with political or religious identity. We see artificial intelligence systems being built by people who can't agree on what values to encode, because every value is now tribal. We see a species with the technological power to destroy itself and the cognitive habits of a chimpanzee troop, loyal to the in-group, hostile to the out-group, and utterly convinced of its own righteousness. I'm not being alarmist. I'm reading the headlines. If we don't learn to hold our beliefs more lightly, if we don't teach the next generation to distinguish between a hypothesis and a holy war, then every other problem we face becomes unsolvable. Climate change, pandemic preparedness, nuclear non-proliferation, our casual destruction of countless ecosystems, AI alignment. None of these have technical solutions alone. They require cooperation across belief divides. They require the ability to say, I might be wrong. Let's look at the evidence together. And right now, too many of us can't or won't say that. So the consequence of failure is not abstract. It's more suffering, more conflict, more avoidable deaths, a slower, more painful unraveling of the systems that sustain life on this planet. Not because we lacked the technology or the resources, but because we couldn't agree on what was real. That's what's at stake. Now, I'm aware that this might sound depressing, but I say it because hope without honesty is just wishful thinking. The good news, and there is good news, is that we already know how to do better. We have the science. We have the educational models. We have the contemplative practices. We have examples of cultures and subcultures that already hold beliefs lightly and still function, still find meaning, still build beautiful things. The question is not, can we? The question is, will we? Will we have the courage to question our own certainties? Will we build institutions that reward flexibility instead of punishing it? Will we teach our children that doubt is a strength, not a weakness? Will we stop treating faith as a trump card in every argument and start treating evidence as the common ground we so desperately need? I don't know the answer, but I know which side I want to be on. I want to leave you with something that stayed with me throughout this whole exploration. There's a quote from the Buddhist teacher Jogjem Jumba that cuts right to the heart of it. He said, "The problem is not that we have beliefs, but that we are had by them." Being had by a belief means it's running you, not the other way round. It means you can't question it without feeling like you're betraying yourself. It means you stopped being a person who holds an idea and started being an idea that holds a person. The goal, as I see it, is not to live without beliefs. It's not possible. And honestly, it's not desirable. Beliefs give us meaning, goals, motivation. They bind us together. They've gotten us this far. The goal is to live with beliefs in a way that leaves us still able to think, still able to question, still able to see the person on the other side of the divide as a human being rather than an enemy. F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function." I think we need to add something to that. The test of a mature civilization might be this: the ability to hold beliefs powerfully without being held by them. We are not going to stop believing, but we might, maybe, learn to believe more wisely. And if we can do that, if we can teach that, if we can build cultures that reward it, then maybe we stand a chance of navigating this incredibly layered, complicated century that's unfolding right now. Not by setting aside our convictions, but by holding them in open hands. Thanks so much. I do hope you found it interesting and maybe gave you something to think about. Cheers.